Working on the intake of the truck today. Yeah, I'll just kick that camera. So I've got the problem everyone has where you need to run your intake, but of course you don't have any room, you don't have any hood clearance. So for now I've just had the MAF stuck right on the throttle body. But what I picked up the other day at the junkyard was this, and this is the air intake off a Trailblazer SS type truck. And it's different than the full-size truck. It's a lot tighter in here, and this whole thing is a lot smaller. You've obviously got this big chunk of crap hanging off the side, but probably not going to use that later. So what I was thinking is I can cut off this large section. I can notch this for the alternator in the belt and give myself plenty of room. Then I can use part of this to plastic weld this back in. Now the obvious downside to this setup is instead of a cold air intake, I'm going to have a hot air intake because all this heat from this radiator hose is going to transfer into the intake. So later down the road I'm going to have to come up with something, but when you're trying to do stuff cheap and shove big engines in small cars, you got to compromise. I might try to slip I don't even know if I want to put a heat shield in there because it might rub, but we'll see how it works. So with this off, you can kind of see how the hose is sitting a little better. Down below this, then I'm going to make a bracket that comes across flush and then uses these little standoffs, and they'll come up through the bottom of that. It's basically just like an aluminum plate I'll put in here, or plastic plate or some kind of plate, just to keep this down here. And it is hot today, so dude's over here just passed out. You sleeping, cat? Yeah, you don't even care. Cut my hoses to where they should line up pretty good. What I did was make a little coupler. All it is kind of barbed on both ends, hollow in the middle, and then I left a space if I ever want to drill and tap it for like a sensor, or I can run my steam line to this if I want to, if my other spot doesn't work, or any of those options. Alright, so that looks like it fits pretty good. Doing some plastic welding on old Franken intake right now. So I'm using, this is a cheap $5 Harbor Freight soldering iron. And you want the tip to be sort of flat. That seems to always work the best. So basically what you do is wherever you got a hole, you take your spare intake pieces or whatever plastic you're working on, and you're going to cut kind of like a splice pieces. I don't know what else to call them. So you just cut it out with whatever you want to cut it with. And then you fit it into your gaps. And then you just take your soldering iron and you melt the edges together. And then when it cools, it hardens. So this is pretty common to do on intake manifolds, to make them where they shave the top of them. And those things can hold boost, so I have no doubt that this will work as far as holding vacuum, since it's just an intake. And that's basically it. So that's all stuck together. You can see I've got all my other splice pieces. Like I said, it's not pretty, but it's functional. And what you can do too, if you want, is you can sand this down, and then you can Bondo it, you can sand it, you can paint it, and some of them look really good. Like if you take your time, you can make this look pretty much like a factory part. But this is the top of the intake tube, so you're not going to see these at all, so I'm not really spending too much time as far as looks, only for functionality. So I'm just going to make sure all my holes are plugged. Then if you've got a big gap, what you can do is cut yourself a strip, kind of like a welding rod. you just cut a long thin piece, kind of like this, or whatever length you need, and then you can just use it, kind of dab it in like you're TIG welding, sort of. And you're just adding material, which is all filler rod does when you're welding. And once you've added it in, you can smooth it out. And that's the basics of it. Just take your time, fill it in, close to maintaining the shape. These were where the square ports were all sticking out towards me. And then I used that extra big piece I had, and all I did was cut sections off of it and use them to fill in the larger areas, and then cut the little pieces to fill in the smaller areas. So while I had my tools out, I made myself one of these. So what this is I got the factory fuse block holder from the junkyard, and to cut off a bunch of stuff I didn't need. The problem I was having was with the factory fuse block holder sitting on the fender. It was, the relays were about an inch into the hood, so the hood wouldn't even close. Of course, that doesn't work. So what I did was I cut a section out. It's about 1.5 inches. Basically cut a section out of the center, which lowered the whole fuse block down. So, because I wanted to keep these little retention tabs that it uses in the sides and the back. And then I cut the very bottom off. So I basically sectioned it, kind of like if you're chopping a top on a car. And then I used a plastic welder, which has these little squiggly things that it heats up, you push them in, and it sticks them together. I used that to line it up. And then using the same soldering iron, I soldered together any joints that I needed to. Kind of soldered all this, left the wires in there too. So it's all pretty reinforced. It's not going anywhere. So now the fuse block retains just like factory. See, it stays in there pretty good. Then all I have to do is take this, screw this down to the fender, and then my fuse block will snap in. And I will be all set as far as safety of my fuse block flopping around, because not too shabby. That'll definitely work. Definitely close though. So I need to make a bracket to connect it to this. Got my fuse block holder down in here, right about where I want it. I actually had a bag of those fancy little plastic push lock things, so I'm going to use those instead since they're non-metallic. Cat, you here to make your cameo? You always show up when the work is done, dude. Kind of makes me suspicious. That does it for the plastic welding adventure. Intake turned out pretty good. I'm happy with it. Fuse block looks fairly good. It sits below the hood line. These relays are actually below the lip, so nothing will hit the hood. But plastic welding works. You can definitely weld on these Trailblazer SS intakes, and you can weld the fuse block if you want, or a fuse block holder.